I just had lunch the other day with Harriet Pearl. She's 80 years old. And I taught with her. She was the one that sort of showed me the ropes when I started teaching in '62. This brilliant woman, when she became a teacher back in the 30s, because the vast majority of women had no place to go other than education or nursing or secretarial work, there was a captive pool of tremendous talent for very low wages. Well, when women started being doctors and lawyers and getting their MBAs, suddenly America lost that pool of exceptional talent. You're not getting the Harriet Pearls anymore for low wages. I taught economics for years, supply and demand. When supply is low and demand is high, the price goes up. Well, we got addicted to Neiman Marcus quality for Kmart prices. But if you want talented, quality teachers, you have to pay for them.
You know, when you sit down and start talking about all of this, we've done a lot. It's been incredible what has happened. And almost 90% of what has happened, we have been on the defense. But most of the time, we've come out victoriously. And it's because we have teachers who care. And will stand up and say it. And will work under adverse circumstances, in the classroom, out of the classroom, wherever they're needed.
It was 1863. The country was embroiled in civil war. Education was not a top priority. Only a few hundred students attended public schools. Teachers were poorly prepared and received meager wages of no more than $50 a month. School Superintendent John Swett convened a teachers' meeting to address these issues.
Well, the history of CTA is very interesting. It was started by school administrators. Their cause was actually very noble. It was to get more funding for public schools.
Back then, it was all rural education. So they were trying to develop a public school system that would best meet the needs of these kids who live far away from large cities. They divided the state into 6 sections. And each of the sections had their own governance structure, their own board of directors, and they operated in that fashion up until 1971. Mostly men, and it wasn't until later on that they admitted women. And for a while, private school teachers could belong to the society as well.
Because San Francisco Bay Area teachers and administrators primarily ran CTA, regional teachers associations were formed throughout the state. Recognizing that the only way to get significant education reform is through legislation, CTA soon formed an advisory council, or State Council of Education.
But it was run by a group of white male school superintendents. That was the California Teachers Association. It should have been called the California Administrators Association, because that's really what it was.
When I first became a teacher, this was typical. One of the questions asked me by the person interviewing me was, would I join the local teachers association? It's a condition of work. And it was run by administrators in the districts.
They prided themselves on being the professional organization as opposed to the AFT, which was the bad union.
I thought that if the organization was blessed with the membership of the very important people, the administrators, it must be a fine group for teachers to belong to. But I didn't realize it was more like a country club, and I was a caddy.
And in the 60s, the administrators put together a state council of teachers And that was the end for the administrative control of California Teachers Association, because once they put together an organ of teachers within the organization, it was only a matter of time until the teachers took it over and threw the administrators out.
The 1929 stock market crash brought bad times to public education. Teachers' salaries were reduced. School funds were drained to help the unemployed. The legislature mounted numerous attacks to remove due process rights for teachers. Students left school to help support their families.
I think the Depression made people really understand how important school was. My father, for example, dropped out during the Depression to get a job. And even though he was a high school dropout, and so was my mother, they both had this tremendous desire that I go to school because education was really important. And for me, that was a benefit that I derived from my parents being denied an education in the Depression.
We have so many new teachers that have no clue about the battles we've fought. Now, my mother was a public school teacher in California, as was my grandmother. This is my mother's school bell from her first school, Forks of Salmon in Northern California in 1940. And my mother retired after 27 years, and her pension today is $407. That's not true for teachers retiring today because we've made the difference. We fought for state teacher retirement system. And California Teachers has been in the forefront of awareness of diverse cultures. I was one of the early employees of one of the sections. I was in Southern Section. When I got out of City College, I finished a secretarial course, and the employment office said, oh, we have an opening for a secretary at California Teachers Association. This was 1947, right after the war, when people were still not sure whether the reaction to Japanese would be favorable or not. And she said, I'm sure that CTA would be a good place for you to work. I was hired by Dr. Arthur Corey before he became executive secretary of the entire California Teachers Association. CTA was virtually the only major organization that came out and spoke out against the Japanese internment here in California after World War II started. I mean, I think our members need to know that.
After World War II, I finished my education at San Francisco State and started teaching in 1949. In the 30s and 40s, many of the teachers thought of themselves as purely professional, but at the end of World War II, a number of former GIs got into teaching, and we became a more vocal group that wanted their share of the pie.
Public schools faced a brighter future after World War II. Servicemen returned home and attended college on the GI Bill.
I began teaching in Los Angeles in 1950. After I had been teaching for a while, we were expecting our first child. And I had to borrow money from my father to get my wife out of the hospital. And it began to soak in on me at that time that really we weren't doing very well when it came to fringe benefits. And we decided we liked teaching, so we wanted to do something about it. And I think that was a beginning of the modern day teacher.